Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. In today's video, we are continuing the recent series that I've been doing on my channel where I preview the upcoming 2020-2021 season for every NBA team. In today's video, we are talking about the Sacramento Kings. Before I get too far into it though, I want to remind you to leave a like and subscribe. I've been appreciating all the support that I've been receiving lately, and I hope to see that continue. Without further ado, let's talk about the Kings. Before we can really preview the season for them though, I want to take a look back and reflect on what they did this past offseason. Their offseason started in the draft where they had the 12th pick and the 35th pick, I believe, and the 43rd pick as well, I'm pretty sure. So with the 12th pick, they ended up taking a guy that I had, I believe, 6th on my big board, and he ended up dropping all the way to them at 12, which was a great value pick. The guy I'm talking about is Tyrese Haliburton, a combo guard from Iowa State. I think that he is a perfect backcourt partner for De'Aaron Fox due to his ability to be just a great role player from either guard position. He can spot up and shoot the ball at a high level off of catch and shoot opportunities. He's a good ball handler and playmaker as a secondary option in the offense, and he does a good job of playing his role and not making mistakes on the defensive end of the floor. Overall, I think that this was a nice pick for the Kings, and I think that he's going to be a perfect fit with De'Aaron Fox in the backcourt for years to come. With the 40th pick, they selected Robert Woodard, who's a wing from Mississippi State. Woodard is, like I said, a wing player. He's very athletic, one of the better athletes in this draft class. He has a 7'1" wingspan, and that, along with the athleticism as well as a solid basketball IQ, all of those factors will combine to make him a very good defensive player who's capable of guarding good wing players at some point in his NBA career. I don't think that he'll be able to play too much immediately because his offensive game is pretty raw and needs to improve. He can shoot it all right from the three-point line, but outside of that, he doesn't have too many abilities in terms of creation, and he also can't shoot it the best off of movement. Most of his three-point shooting success came off of catch and shoot opportunities at the college level, so he'll need to make improvements with his shot as well as his shot creation. But due to his athleticism, I think that a couple years from now, he's going to look like one of the bigger steals in this draft. I had him as a top 25 guy, I think I had him 27th on my big board. So getting him at 40, once again, another great pick by the Kings. I think they really nailed this draft. With the 43rd pick, they drafted Jahmi'us Ramsey, who is another guard/wing type player that a lot of people thought could have maybe gone in the first round. I was not nearly as high on Jahmi'us Ramsey. I had him outside of my top 46. On my big board, I ranked 46 players. It was the 46 guys that I viewed as eventual rotation pieces at the NBA level, and Ramsey did not squeak into that conversation for me, but he was one of the first players left off that list. I probably would have had him in the 47 to 55 range, so certainly drafting him at 43 is not a terrible reach. He has shown an ability to score the basketball, which is always important, but he can't do too much besides that. He has a good frame, and that might allow him to become a decent defensive player at some point, but he was pretty bad in his one season at Texas Tech, and the defense was bad enough that it was to a point that Chris Beard, Texas Tech's head coach, was uncomfortable with playing Jahmi'us Ramsey to close games because of his defensive struggles. So while the scoring is magnificent, his playmaking needs to improve, and so does his defense. That is why I wasn't the hugest Jahmi'us Ramsey fan, but I do understand the glamour that would come with taking a guy like him, and at the 43rd pick, you weren't going to do much better. I would have preferred taking a wing like Jordan Nwora or Mason Jones if that was the route that they wanted to go in, but this is certainly an excusable pick. And I certainly loved the Halliburton pick and the Woodard pick, so overall, good draft by the Kings. In free agency, they signed Hassan Whiteside to a minimum deal, Frank Kaminsky to a minimum deal, and they re-signed Daquan Jeffries, who was on a two-way for them last season, to a, I believe, partially guaranteed 2-year, $3 million deal. That might be fully guaranteed, though. Overall, not too many big moves for them in free agency, but I do think that they made some good signings, which I will get to a bit later. Now, I'm going to go over every player on the roster and lay out some of my expectations for what I think that they can do in this upcoming season. We'll start with the point guard position, where the franchise cornerstone plays, De'Aaron Fox. We've seen him show massive improvement from season to season throughout his first 3 years in the NBA. In his rookie year, he really struggled, didn't shoot the ball very efficiently at all, was very turnover prone, and his defense was pretty bad. Into his second year, we saw his scoring increase, we saw his playmaking increase, and we saw him become a competent NBA defensive player. Those were big improvements for him, and that got Kings fans very, very excited about De'Aaron Fox as a potential leader for this team moving forward and a key building block in this ever-going Kings rebuild. Now, in his past season, we saw him take a leap to being probably like a borderline all-star level player, and I think he would have been in all-star discussions much more if not for an injury that he suffered at the beginning of the season. We saw him take another jump in his scoring. His playmaking actually improved as he averaged more assists per 100 possessions. The reason why his assists per game number went down was because the team played at a much slower pace under Luke Walton than they did in the previous season under Dave Yeager. So we saw De'Aaron Fox continue to make improvements. He's a pretty solid defender at this point with a penchant for creating transition opportunities due to his quick hands and ability to get deflections and steals. De'Aaron Fox is the guy that this team wants to build around. They view the way he plays as the tone setter for their franchise, and he's really the key building block for them moving forward. Corey Joseph is the other point guard, pure point guard on this roster. I guess he's either the backup or the third point guard at this point, depending on how you view Tyrese Haliburton's positioning. But Corey Joseph is pretty much the standard backup point guard. You know what you're going to get from him. He's an above-average passer. He does a good job taking care of the ball, rarely turns it over, is a league-average shooter, right around 33 or 34% from his career, right around the league average mark. He's an average defensive player, good in rotations, but nothing extraordinary on the ball, not a defensive playmaker, not going to create transition opportunities for your team. But in the locker room, he's a good veteran guy to have around, and he's a backup point guard. What else do you want from him? Moving on to the wing positions, although I guess there's one last guard that I could address again. Tyrese Haliburton, like I said, is a combo guard type who is at least going to be an extraordinary role player. I believe in this season, he'll probably be the first guy or second guy off the bench for this team. But moving forward, I believe that he's the backcourt partner of the Kings' dreams alongside De'Aaron Fox. I really liked that pick at 12, and I've kind of talked a little bit more about Haliburton and how he profiles in the NBA before when I talked about the draft picks, so I won't go too extensively into him, but I do think that he will be a competitor to make an all-rookie team. Buddy Hield would be the first wing player that we'd kick it off with. Hield is a high-volume three-point shooter, attempted 11 threes per game last season, and that is really where his value is the highest. As a floor spacer, he shoots the ball at an elite level. He can shoot it both off the dribble, on the run, off catch and shoots. He's a terrific shooter, has great shot mobility, can shoot it from odd angles, and is really a threat from anywhere on the floor. This past season, we saw his three-point shooting percentage fall down quite a bit from, I believe, 42 or 43% down to 39%. But 39% is still a very high efficiency level from the three-point line. And I think that a big reason why that efficiency did go down was because Hield was playing on the ball quite a bit more, so he was forced to shoot off the dribble threes more than he probably would have liked. He's far from a complete player, though. His playmaking needs to take a step forward. He doesn't really do much in terms of shot creation whatsoever. Obviously, he can create open looks just with the gravity that he has as a shooter, but once he has the ball in his hands, he needs to get better at attacking closeouts and creating looks for his teammates. He's also quite turnover prone for a player that is not a great playmaker. I believe he averaged about 3 assists per game last season and 2.5 turnovers, so obviously that is a pretty poor ratio. He needs to improve on that playmaking stuff, but if he can do that, then Buddy Hield is going to be an all-star level player on the offensive end. The defense is another story. He is not a good defensive player, doesn't seem to be completely locked in on the defensive end for large portions of games. Overall, he needs to improve there. His team defense is pretty bad. He's not great at rotations, and on the ball, he's not a guy who's capable of guarding the high-level guards and wings in the NBA. So, Buddy Hield, great shooter, but needs to improve in the other areas of his game in order for him to be really worth that huge contract extension that the Kings gave him before last season. Justin James is another wing player. Very little playing time last season, but in that playing time, he did show that he is a good defender. He played 4 seasons in college. I forget what school he went to, but it was not exactly a blue blood from what I remember. But like I said, good defensive player. Didn't shoot the ball well in his limited playing time, so the shooting needs to improve. But he's still a young player and someone that the Kings are going to be looking to take a step forward into being an NBA level guy. Harrison Barnes is another wing, probably the closest thing to a big wing defender that this team has. Harrison's not great on the defensive end of the floor. He's almost a complete zero in terms of defensive playmaking, as he has very low block and steal rates. But he does pretty much everything else well. He does a decent job of keeping guys in front of him. He's good in rotations. So overall on the defensive end, he's grades out as right around league average, as someone that does their job but doesn't do anything more than their job. He's also a good rebounder because he's very strong and a pretty big guy in general. So that's another plus to his game. On the offensive end, he shoots the ball very well. We saw him have a career year in terms of efficiency, shot at 38% from 3. He's a pretty good floor spacer, and when you have him alongside Buddy Hield, that's really a lot of good shooting from the wing positions on the court. Harrison also has a bit of an ability to score the ball off the dribble, but he still just has not reached the level that people thought that he would when the Warriors took him, I believe, 7th overall, coming out of North Carolina. Still, he's a very good role player. He does his job, and that is very, very important on an NBA team. He's not worth what he's getting paid. I believe he's getting somewhere in the mid-20s annually, and he has not played up to that price tag, but he's still a good player and someone that is going to help this Kings team to be competitive next season. Daquan Jeffries is probably the last wing guy on this team. I wouldn't consider Bielitsa or Jabari Parker to be wing players. They're more of big guys. So Jeffries will round out the wing group. He's actually someone that I was a pretty big fan of the Kings keeping around. I think that last year when he was on a 2-way contract, he showed that he's an athletic and strong wing player who at some point is going to be a pretty good defensive guy at the NBA level. He needs to improve his three-point shooting, as I believe he only shot at 33% in his season in the G League last year. But if he can do that, then you're going to have an exciting, energetic 3-and-D guy who can come off the bench and give you good minutes. So Daquan Jeffries on a cheap price tag was a nice move for the Kings this offseason. I guess you have the two rookies, Ramsey and Woodard, but I've already talked about them earlier when I was going over the draft, so I'll skip over them and we'll move on to the big man positions. Marvin Bagley is probably going to be the starter at the 4, I think, for this team. In his rookie season, he came off the bench for a lot of the time, and in his sophomore season, he was injured for almost the entirety of the year. So now in his third season in the NBA, the Kings are going to be looking for him to live up to some of that tantalizing potential that he showed when they drafted him second overall over Luka Doncic, over Jaren Jackson Jr., over Trae Young, over Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. Yeah, that pick is not looking so good for the Kings anymore, but if Bagley can become the flexible big man who can guard multiple positions, play multiple positions, and really score the ball at a high rate on the offensive end while also being a good floor spacer, then maybe it can warrant, or maybe not warrant, but at least excuse a little bit of the whole him being taken over Luka thing. It's not a great look still, but hey, I'm just trying to be the optimist here. If Marvin Bagley can get close to an all-star level, then that will be a win for the Kings, and they need him to reach that level in order for this rebuild to really get going. Last year, he was injured for most of the year. I believe he only appeared in 13 games and really didn't look great in those 13 games. So this is a key season for Bagley, and they are going to need him to really step up his play. Nemanja Bjelica is one of the better role players in the entire NBA, can really shoot it at a high level, which is super important. Like, this team has a fair amount of shooting. Hield can really shoot it. Barnes is a good shooter. Tyrese Haliburton is going to come in and be an above-average shooter. Bjelica, like I just said, can really, really stroke it. This team can shoot the ball very, very well. With Bjelica, he's also a decent playmaker for his teammates from the forward position, posts a very high assist rate for someone that has as low of usage as he does. He's also solid on the defensive end of the floor. He's not a great athlete, so he has to use high basketball IQ to his advantage. And he does a good job of that, and it's actually made him into a good defensive player. So overall, Nemanja Bjelica is one of the better role players in the entire NBA. I think that could make him an interesting trade chip for the Kings in this upcoming season, and someone that I would definitely be looking to move in exchange for good draft capital if I were Monte McNair. And I do think that contenders for the NBA championship would be interested in Bjelica as someone that can come off the bench, space the floor, and play good defense for your team. So he, alongside Buddy Hield, are the two real trade chips that I think that this team has. With Hield, he's got to show that he's the type of player that he showed he was 2 seasons ago before all of the drama of last season. But if he can do that, then I think that the Kings could probably flip him for assets. At this point, though, his contract looks pretty bad. So I don't think that they would be able to get much in return from him aside from matching contracts. Moving on past that little side tangent of trade chips, let's talk about Jabari Parker. Parker was a guy who made my list of most underrated free agents. Now, obviously, he never made free agency because he opted into his player option, but I do think that Jabari Parker is a step above where a lot of people view him. He is a decent NBA player. He's a very good finisher at the rim, and he actually gets open looks a lot of the time due to just his brute strength. Obviously, that's gone a bit out of style, and you're not really relying on players that are inside scorers as much at this point as you were 10 years ago, but he can do a good job as a rim runner in the pick and roll. He's a good finisher. He's a good rebounder because of his plus size, and he's actually gotten himself to a point where he's like slightly below average on defense. He's not good by any stretch, but he's also not the apathetic, terrible defensive player that he was at one point. So I do think that he's an interesting guy for the Kings and someone that they should really look to integrate into their rotation. Although their big man rotation is pretty loaded with Bagley, with Bjelica, with Holmes, with Whiteside. So maybe Jabari Parker doesn't get too many minutes, but I do think that he's an interesting player, and I would like to see him get some run. He's still very young, which people tend to forget. I just feel like Jabari Parker is worth more than what most people do, and I'm trying to make that clear, I guess, if that makes sense. Frank Kaminsky signed him on a minimum, and as much as it pains me to say this as a proud Wisconsin Badger fan, I don't think Frank Kaminsky's an NBA player. He's okay on defense, nothing special. Can't really guard too many positions because he's slow on the perimeter and he's not great as a rim protector in the paint. So, yeah, not too much coming from him there. He's mostly just a stretch big man on the offensive end of the floor, but the funny thing is that he's pretty much just an average shooter. So even there, he's not bringing you much value. So at this point, I think he's nothing more than an end-of-the-bench guy who really should not be getting key rotation minutes. It's sad to say, but I think it's true. We'll move on to the true big guys. The ones I've talked about so far are more power forwards than center, but there's really two centers on this roster, and they are both pretty interesting guys, Rashawn Holmes and Hassan Whiteside. Holmes really took off as a Sacramento King last season, proved that he is a good starting center in the NBA. Good, he's good at rim protecting, averaged, I believe, 3.8 blocks per 100. That can't be. I think maybe it was 2.8 blocks per 100 possessions, which is still a very high number. Does a good job protecting the rim. He can switch out and guard on the perimeter a little bit as well, but you're not asking him to do too much of that. On the offensive end, he's a good screen setter. He's a good rim runner. He can really finish at a high level in the paint, and that's important. He's a pretty stereotypical big man, but he's on a cheap deal, and that is very valuable to the Kings. He's another guy that I think you could probably get some interesting draft capital in exchange for. But he's also a really good player and maybe not someone you want to move on from if you are the Kings. Finally, you have Hassan Whiteside, the last man on this roster that I have yet to talk about. He, similar to Holmes, is a fantastic rim protector. I believe he led the NBA in blocks in this past season. And he's also a very good rebounder both on the offensive end and the defensive end. He can finish at a high level, throws down lobs as well as anyone, and is pretty good in the pick and roll. Based off of that production alone, I think that he's a valuable player. I believe that Hassan Whiteside is worth far more than the minimum, and the reason why I don't think teams wanted to bring him on for something like the mid-level exception was because of the character questions, but it seemed like he did okay in Portland last year. If the Kings can get him to buy in and really be focused, then you have a guy who's probably a top 10, at the very least a top 15 starting center in the NBA who can really block shots and dunk lobs at a very high level, which at this point, if he's not a stretch big guy, if he can do those two things, then that's pretty much what you're asking for from your center. So I do think that was a very good value signing with Whiteside on the minimum. If worst comes to worst and he's an absolute cancer in the locker room and you can't handle it anymore, the deal is cheap enough that you could just cut him. Finally, we'll move on to the two-way guys. I believe it's just Kyle Guy at this point. At Virginia, he could score the ball at a pretty high level, really good shooter. The defense wasn't great, but he's a smart guy and maybe will work himself into becoming a backup point guard, backup wing type at some point in the NBA. and they have Chimezi Metu as a training camp invite. Don't really know much about him besides the fact that he was in the Spurs system as a two-way player the past couple of years. So, hey, maybe he could become an NBA guy. I don't really know. So, to sum it all up, this Kings team is in an interesting position where they have some interesting young players that they've drafted within the past 5 years, like De'Aaron Fox, like Tyrese Haliburton, like Marvin Bagley, and they also have some good role-playing veterans, like Corey Joseph, Buddy Hield, Harrison Barnes, Bielitsa, Holmes. Now it just is a matter of whether or not those pieces can put it all together and get this team to the point that it needs to in order to be successful in the Western Conference. And I guess the other question would be, if even all those pieces do fit together well, what's the ceiling for this team? I would say the ceiling is probably sneaking into the play-in tournament as either the 9 seed or the 10 seed. I could see that happening if De'Aaron Fox takes another step forward, improves his game like we've seen him do in each of his first 3 seasons. Oh, I forgot to talk about this, I think. I loved what De'Aaron Fox did in his mid-range game. He got so much better in the in-between. He was already a great finisher, and this year he made huge steps in improving his floater, which I think was great. So we can see him take another step like that. I think it would probably have to come in the three-point shooting. If he can become a really lethal three-point shooter, then I think we could see De'Aaron Fox take a jump forward to being an all-star level guy. If we see that happen in conjunction with Marvin Bagley having a resurgence onto the NBA landscape, and Tyrese Haliburton is competing for Rookie of the Year, Buddy Hield bounces back to his 2018-2019 form, then we could see this Kings team compete for a spot in the play-in tournament. If those things don't happen, those were a lot of ifs. So if, only 1 or 2 of those happens, then I think that this team is likely to be picking in the top 7 like they have so many times before. And I actually don't think that that's necessarily a bad thing due to the strength of this upcoming year's draft. So overall, if I were to make a prediction for the Kings win-loss total, I would think that in the regular season they are probably between a 28 and 34 win team. So in this shortened season, they're probably more of a 25 to 30 win team. So that's what I will make my prediction. The Kings will win between 25 and 30 games. I don't think that that's really terrible if you are a Kings fan, because even if you do make the play-in tournament, who knows if you're going to be able to move on, and if you do, you're probably going to be out in the first round. I get that breaking the streak of whatever it is, 13 consecutive missed postseasons would be great, but I also think that you have some interesting young pieces, and adding another guy to that young core could be a solid move. I think that is everything. Leave a like and subscribe if you enjoyed this video. Let me know in the comments section down below, how good do you think the Kings are going to be this season? Do you agree with my record prediction for them? Let me know. I think that's it for me. Ladies and gentlemen, I will see you all again very soon.